Hello and welcome to Shakespeare Illuminated, where we want to shed some light on the Shakespeare plays. I'm Michael Delahoyde, a graduate of Kinry Road Elementary School and later on the University of Michigan. And I had Shakespeare thrust upon me in teaching 25 years ago and have been obsessed with it ever since. I love reading it, seeing it, teaching it, thinking about Shakespeare, and sharing ideas about Shakespeare. And that's what we're all going to be about in this series. So, much ado about nothing. Without further ado, here we go. Much ado about nothing. So here are some initial questions we want to try answering about this play. First of all, the title, Much Ado About Nothing. Why so dismissive? And Shakespeare does this. As you like it, what you will. It's just a Midsummer Night's Dream. So there's one. Second, why is Shakespeare here and so often obsessed with unfaithful women and with men being cuckolded play after play? And third, why is thematically the supreme crime in this play slander? Before we plunge, let me explain that our mission here is again to appreciate the brilliance of Shakespeare's plays. And when faced with odd concerns and often baffling passages, to speculate, can we understand his work further through consideration of the Shakespeare authorship question? That is, if we untether ourselves from the insistence that the works were written by the Stratford grain merchant Shakespeare instead of Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, using the pen name Shakespeare, such as the so-called Oxfordian perspective, is Shakespeare better illuminated? This series is sponsored by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, whose website can inform you much more about this perspective if it's new to you. Beware how you handle the Oxfordian information given in this series. The issue of the Shakespeare authorship is hotly contested and too typically meets with hostility, especially in schools and colleges, as I know well, where with religious intensity, it's even labeled a heresy. We don't want anybody flunking English because of someone else's unawareness or intolerance. Pretty intriguing, right? Much ado about nothing. First of all, the title. It's one of those deceptively dismissive titles where nothing is, in fact, an obsession with Shakespeare. He's always playing with the idea of nothing or zero or naught or O. And this has been the case for the Earl of Oxford since he was young and signing his poems E.O., Earl of Oxford. But of course, in the later days, since he gets canceled out, obliterated from literary history, he feels like he's not. He feels like he's a zero. But there's also much ado about nothing. The O is a female sexual symbol. And if you know your Hamlet, Hamlet gets really annoyed at Ophelia and starts saying some bawdy things about what lies between a maid's legs and nothing, my lord, oh, or ought. So that's called the bawdy O, and I'm not going to say anything more about that, except that in this play, there's a whole lot of people who are really concerned about what Hero is doing with her bawdy female sexual O. But we're also told that Elizabethan pronunciation would have had a harder TH sound so that nothing would have sounded like noting, noting, noting. And there are three ways that that applies here. One is noting, like noticing. And even in the first scene, Benedick distinguishes, well, I looked on her, but I didn't really note her. I didn't notice her. And that's something that you always want to foster, your ability to note carefully. Secondly, there are characters in this play, especially Dogberry later, who wants everything written down. If it's not written down, we don't know if it's actually true. So we have to note, we have to have notes. And there are other notes that fly around. In fact, the very first thing that happens is somebody gets a note. And then finally, thirdly, noting is also the idea of setting text to music, that you create notes. And music ends up being a significant factor in this play. So that's a lot of nothing for our start. And what we begin with is a note that announces to Leonato he is the governor of Messina. We're in Italy. Finding out that we have won some kind of military skirmish and that all the soldiers are coming back triumphant. Beatrice interrupts the conversation, and her first line is, I pray you, is Signor Montalto returned from the wars or no? The messenger says, I don't know anybody named that. What are you talking about? Her own uncle says, what on earth are you talking about? And it takes her confidant, friend, cousin, Harrow, to say, she means Signor Benedick. Oh, that guy. Yeah, I know about him. Now, what is her comment about? Is Signor Montalto returned from the wars or no? Well, we have to look at the footnotes that the Shakespeareans have given us. Montanto, from Italian montanto, a fencing term meaning an upward blow or thrust. Ah, okay. What? Thank you, scholarship. That means nothing. I think the point is here that the characters in the play don't know what on earth she's talking about. The scholars don't know what on earth she's talking about. And nobody knows except her cousin, who realizes she is locked into this animosity against this Benedict character. So she's not communicating very well the rage that she feels inside her. She's way more articulate and sophisticated than Katerina at the beginning of Taming of the Shrew. But it's kind of the same situation, that she is really locked into this hatred. Well, Leonardo tries to make it okay with the messenger that she's railing on about this, but there's always this merry war between her and Benedick when they get together. They never meet, but there's a skirmish of wit between them. Excellent. Love, hate. They belong together. We know this from page one. Well, the she rails a bit more about Benedick, and then the soldiers are about to come in. And in the Kenneth Branagh 1993 film version of the play, when the title "Much Ado About Nothing" shows on the screen, all the soldiers go, "Yes!" And it's just a brilliant moment because, like, nothing, hurrah! All right, but they get into the conversation with Leonardo, and they're invited in. We've got Don Pedro is the military leader. He's considered a prince. He's the authority figure. We got Benedick and Claudio. We've talked a bit about him before. He's this young soldier that we have interest in too. And also Don Pedro's half brother, Don John, called Don John the Bastard. We don't know what the backstory is there. There's some other backstories we're not sure about either. All right, so we've had Beatrice's first line. Up comes Benedick's very soon after the soldiers come in. There is some general greeting, but pretty quickly, Don Pedro turns to Leonardo, looks at Harrow, and says, I think this is your daughter. Leonardo says, her mother hath many times told me so. And this typical Shakespearean joke, because it shows up in Taming of the Shrew and elsewhere, is that, you can't be certain about who's the father of the children, but said in a jokingly way. Okay. Benedick interjects and says, were you in doubt, sir, that you asked her? Now, the joke has already been landed, so he's just poking his nose into these things. The reason possibly that this is a Shakespearean concern is that the Earl of Oxford doubted the paternity of his own first daughter, Elizabeth Vere, when he was abroad in Italy, and he had such a fit that he would have nothing to do with his wife, the child, or the entire family for several years after that. Further, he was considered a bastard, or accused of being one, when his half-sister wanted to gain some control over some estates. And it seems as if Elizabeth one time called him that, and he flipped out. So it is a Shakespearean concern and an Oxfordian concern too. Happily, Leonardo gets back on top of this conversation by saying, after Benedick, were you in doubt, sir, that you asked her? Leonardo says, Senior Benedick, no, for then were you a child. In other words, we didn't have to worry about our wives' fidelity back in the day because you weren't old enough to do anything about it, which characterizes Benedick as a bit of a rake, and perhaps the Earl of Oxford in a way too. But when Benedick and Beatrice meet up again, we get that skirmish of wit, we've got that merry war, and we've got a scene to play of their meeting.
I wonder that you will still be talking, Signor Benedick. Nobody marks you.
What, my dear Lady Disdain? Are you yet living?
Is it possible Disdain should die when she had such meat food to feed it as Signor Benedick? Courtesy itself must convert to disdain if you come in her presence.
Oh, then is courtesy a turncoat? But it is certain I am loved of all ladies, only you excepted, and I would I could find in my heart that I had not a hard heart, for truly I love none.
A dear happiness to women. They had else been troubled with their pernicious suitor. I thank God and my cold blood that I am of your humour for that. I had rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loves me.
Oh, God keep your ladyship still in that mind, so some gentleman or other shall scape a predestinate scratched face.
Scratching could not make it worse, and 'twere such a face as yours were.
Well, you are a rare parrot teacher.
A bird of my tongue is better than a beast of yours.
Well, I would my horse had the speed of your tongue, and so good a continuer, but keep your way, in God's name, I have done.
You always end with a jade's trick. I know you of old.
Oh, they so belong together. Well, Claudio addresses Benedick and wonders about, hey, you know about this Harrow girl? And Benedick says, well, I didn't note her. I looked on her. Yeah. And it becomes clear that Claudio's really interested in her. And Benedick gets nervous about this because Benedick has this weird behavioral problem where he immediately thinks interest in a girl, marriage, cuckoldry. It's like instant. He does that all the time. Just like, interest in a girl, marriage, cuckoldry. What is his problem? Well, it might be the Earl of Oxford's problem, since it seems like he distrusted his wife with the birth of their first daughter when he was in Italy in 1575, and would have nothing to do when he came back with her, the kid, or her family, including his father-in-law, who was Lord Burleigh, Elizabeth's chief treasurer, spymaster, advisor, etc. So the trauma that you see in Shakespeare again and again about unfaithful women might have autobiographical implications. When Don Pedro comes in and Benedick immediately tattles on Claudio saying he's in love and Don Pedro's fine with that if she's a worthy lady. But Benedick is just railing against women, and Claudio and Don Pedro banter with him for a while, but it's just that he's become too much of an annoyance and they find an excuse to get rid of him. And Claudio then has the opportunity to explain to his superior officer, my lord, when you went onward on this ended action, I looked upon her, Harrow, with a soldier's eye that liked, but had a rougher task in hand than to drive liking to the name of love. But now I am returned, and that war thoughts have left their places vacant, in their rooms come thronging soft and delicate desires, all prompting me how fair young Harrow is, saying I liked her ere I went to wars. Well, that sounds romantic enough. No, it doesn't. It sounds like, your brain is a vessel, and when it's filled with war thoughts, that's fine. But when the war's over, it's a vacuum. And like, what's next? Oh, I know, I could be in love. So this guy is really kind of immature and a bit of a problem. But Don Pedro agrees to go along with this. And in this other weird twist, Don Pedro is going to woo Harrow for Claudio. Somehow He's going to articulate Claudio's. It must be like at the lockers where I know somebody who likes you. Do you like him? And that's, I guess, what's going on. But it's also significant, probably, that Claudio doesn't talk to her himself. He really ought to, especially later on. In the second scene in Act One, somebody's overheard, so noted but misnoted the idea that Don Pedro is going after Harrow. So Leonardo hears that and expects, oh, so he's going to marry her? Okay, fine with me. And in the last scene, scene 3 of Act 1, we hear a bit about Don John the Bastard. When he came in, he was welcomed into the crowd and he said, thank you. I am not of many words, but I thank you. And you think, whoa, that's dark. We're in Shakespeare and somebody's not of many words. Well, it turns out he is of many words if he can talk about what a villain he is, which he does through all of this to his one or two comrades. He just says, basically, I'm a villain. That's the thing. And that's impressive to me that Shakespeare occasionally will have a character who you know is evil, but it's not because he didn't get hugs as a child or daddy or anything like that. There are just people walking around the earth who are bastards. Literally. Here, Don John. But also related to the Oxfordian matter is that Oxford had 3 enemies like this. His cousin Henry Howard, Francis Southwell, and Charles Arundel. They all palled around and seemed to be really into Italian culture. And of course, Oxford would have been into the theater, the music, the art, just the glory of being away from dull England, where we haven't even really had a Renaissance yet. But eventually he realized these other guys, they weren't so much cultural as political. And it seems like they were scheming and plotting treason against Elizabeth, that they wanted, like so many other times and batches of villains, they wanted to assassinate her and put probably Mary Queen of Scots on the throne and return England to Catholicism. When Oxford realized how serious that was, he ratted them out to Queen Elizabeth. She called them in, asked them questions, and as was typical of Elizabeth, dithered and didn't know what to do, back and forth. And they were all under suspicion for a long while because these 3 guys accused Oxford of everything under the sun they could think of. That he worships the devil, that he has murderous plans against the Earl of Leicester and Philip Sidney and Christopher Hatton, that as he's a pederast. Let's see, what else? Oh, he said you had a bad singing voice. Yeah, that was one of his crimes. And he's always drunk and he's always railing. And so you got a lot of characters in Shakespeare who are railing all the time, like Benedick. But you also have that autobiographical impulse because Oxford himself was known to be railing. So among the accusations, as I just said, railing at Frances Southwell for commending the Queen's singing one night. Some guy said her singing was good and Oxford was railing against it. And also among these Howard Arundel libels, they're called, this long list of all the crimes of Oxford, that in railing of all estates he overruns him, sparing no woman be she never so virtuous, nor no man being never so honorable, and this beast, Oxford, being never restrained from this liberty of railing. So as I say, you get a lot of railing characters in Shakespeare, but pay attention because that's his art form, I think. No one's done it before. Well, Benedick does. And again, we got the 3 criminals here who decide, all right, anything we can do to mess with those people, my brother, Don Pedro, can't get him directly, but through Claudio, we can mess that up. Let's do it. So Don John decides we've got to come up with a scheme to unnerve everyone. In Act 2, we're all going to go to kind of a banquet costume party, the type that Oxford would have experienced in Italy. Much fun, people wearing masks and all. And you get a couple of the pairings of people and exchanges of characters, but mostly what we want is, oh, Benedick and Beatrice, they get together, but they're disguised. And probably Beatrice knows perfectly well that that's Benedick, but he doesn't know that she knows. And so we cut into their conversation. Beatrice says, "You're not going to tell me who told you this?" No. Now, what did this guy say that you're reporting? And here is their exchange.
That I was disdainful, and that I had my good wit out of the 100 merry tales. Well, this was Signor Benedick that said so.
What's he?
I am sure you know him well.
Oh, not I, believe me.
Did he never make you laugh?
I pray you, what is he?
Why, he is the prince's jester, a very dull fool. Only his gift is in devising impossible slanders. None but libertines delight in him. And then the commendation is not in his wit, but in his villainy. For he both pleases men and angers them, and then they laugh at him and beat him. I am sure he is in the fleet. I would he had boarded me.
The prince's jester. Elizabeth liked to be called the prince. And to be called the prince's jester is a professional insult against Oxford because and it's not the only play where he gets that too, but he thought of himself as much more than just a clown figure. So his only gift is in devising impossible slanders. The plays, when they attack other courtiers or mock people like Lord Burleigh, Christopher Hatton, Philip Sidney, and others. None but libertines delight in him. Well, people are enjoying the plays at the court. And the combination not his wit, but his villainy, he pleases men and angers them, and then they laugh at him and beat him. Well, certainly Oxford pleased some people, including Elizabeth, who couldn't get away with it herself, but loved to see other people get skewered, and angered those who were skewered. So it sounds like it's kind of a resume of Oxford. Now, here's the interesting difference between these parallel scenes between Benedick and Beatrice. Beatrice immediately knows, oh, what did he say? Okay, well, obviously that's Benedick. But Benedick takes a hot minute before he realizes what's going on here. In the meantime, Don John pretends that he thinks Claudio disguised is Benedick. So he says, boy, I wish you would warn him off of her. Hero's way below her, and he's wooing her. And Claudio thinks, oh, I've been betrayed by Don Pedro. He actually woos for himself. So he immediately and immaturely says that friendship is constant in all other things, save in the office and affairs of love. So he's done. Farewell, hero. Well, that was fast. Maybe you should have talked to her yourself. And Benedick encounters him and wonders, why is your nose so out of joint? And Claudio, we need to resolve this eventually. But then Benedick has his own moment and processes what has just been exchanged between himself and Beatrice. So here's what happens when he has his own realization.
But that my lady Beatrice should know me and not know me. The prince's fool. Ha! It may be I go under that title because I'm merry. Yea, but so I am apt to do myself wrong. I am not so reputed. It is the base though bitter disposition of Beatrice that puts the world into her person and so gives me out. Well, I'll be revenged as I may.
Well, what interests me there is that it takes Benedick a minute to put it all together. Beatrice is quicker on the uptake. So maybe it's his ego or something that's getting in the way, and he eventually figures it out. But duh. So Claudio comes back we resolve that problem, and he realizes, oh, well, I was wrong. I was told the wrong information, and Hero is actually fine. And Don Pedro just wooed on my behalf and broke with the father, that is, got Leonardo on board with the match between Claudio and Hero. The reunion of these, or union of these two, involves some silence, and Beatrice has to kind of goad them into talking. She even says something like, Claudio, that's your cue. You're supposed to say something there, like she's a stage director. And if you have nothing to say, stop her mouth with a kiss. But Beatrice does the same thing that Benedick does there, kind of intrudes herself and pokes herself into other people's business in a way. But she gets away with it somehow a lot better. So that gets resolved. But Benedick is still now bent out of shape about the conversation and having anything to do with Beatrice. So he comes up to Don Pedro and asks for this favor to get the heck out of here and away from Beatrice in this scene.
Will your grace command me any service to the world's end? I will go on the slightest errand now to the Antipodes that you can devise to send me on. I will fetch you a toothpicker now from the furthest inch of Asia, bring you the length of Prester John's foot, fetch you a hair off the great Cham's beard, do you any embassage to the pygmies rather than hold 3 words conference with this harpy.
Oxfordian explanations here. Among other things, we hear about the Khan's beard, this going to the hair off the great Khan's beard, or Cham's beard. What the heck is that? And the footnotes will tell you, Khan of Tartary, like Genghis Khan of the Mongols. All right. Is that a regular thing? Is that real? The great Cham's beard. Well, the Lord Great Chamberlain, abbreviated Cham, Great Cham, was the Earl of Oxford, one of his court positions. And the hair off the Great Cham's beard. Are we playing with our identity clues here? And in fact, does beard refer to that cover of identity that one might adopt? And I'm not even going to go into the hair, H-E-I-R punning that might be going on there. But it's a pretty packed possible punning in that case. Well, Don Pedro and Beatrice have a moment together when Benedick storms off and has nothing to do with her. And it's difficult to gauge to what extent Don Pedro is serious when he says, well, will you have me, lady, since nobody else seems to like you. You've lost the heart of Senior Benedick. And she makes some comment, oh, no, your grace is too costly to wear every day, using that fashion idea about matching with somebody. But then she realizes, oh, maybe I've offended the guy, I guess. But I say, I was born to speak all mirth and no matter. Don Pedro says, well, your silence most offends me, and to be merry becomes you. You were born in a merry hour. Beatrice says, no, I wasn't. My mother cried when I was born. But, things got better afterwards. And we wonder, is Shakespeare Oxford thinking about Queen Elizabeth, who would have heard that line and realized my mother cried when I was born? Well, certainly Anne Boleyn had reason to when it turned out to be a girl and Henry VIII decided, yeah, this is not going well, and off with her head eventually. So the intensity between Benedick and Beatrice might also be autobiographical here, but some would say that she might also embody Oxford's mistress, Anne Vavasor, because when he came back and distrusted his own wife, he had an affair with one of Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting, Anne Vavasor, and that seemed to be really an intense affair, resulting in a pregnancy that was kept secret somehow, I guess the fashion of the time, until the baby was born. Oxford, the baby, and his mistress were all chucked in the tower. And this is when his real disgrace came, fast on the heels of that Howard Arundel problem. Shakespeare goes through a dark period. Seems like Oxford had one right there before he was restored to favor at court some years later. Anyway, to brighten things up, Don Pedro thinks, it'd be fun to try to get Benedick and Beatrice together because clearly they belong together, and everybody laughs and says, "What, are you crazy? An hour together, they talk each other mad." No, I think we can do it. Let's plot. Now, there's the evil plot going on. It happens in the very next scene between Don and John. First plot didn't work, tried to break up Claudio and Hero, but now we've got another one. And Borachio, whose name is associated with drunkenness, or some Oxfordians would say broach, that is stab, E.O., that E.O., Earl of Oxford, and his predilection for naming characters, E.O., Benvolio, goodwill towards E.O. Anyway, Borachio says, "I got a scheme. See what you think. We can try again." And Don John says, "Yeah, let's do it." The end of Act 2, we've got first of two parallel scenes with beginning of Act 3, and Benedick, in a perfectly extraneous moment, is hanging out with some boy as a servant, and he sends him away. "Go get my book from the windowsill." And the boy says, "Well, yeah, but I can..." No, just get out of here." This might be another address to one of the Howard Arundel libels where they said that Oxford, had a thing about boys. Well, here it's answered, no, he doesn't want a boy around. He wants him to go away. In any case, he's having a fit about Claudio and being in love. The others come in, Don Pedro, Leonardo, and Claudio, with their scheme. They know he's there. He's going to overhear them saying that Beatrice is absolutely in love with him. And they play it up and say, well, maybe he should know. And somebody else will say, no, he's just such a vicious person. He would just mock her, and, it'd be too hurtful for him. So they're overhearing matters about themselves, not just matters about each other in these two scenes. And it's not just like, oh, she likes him and he likes her. It's that these characters are also saying there's just something missing or wrong with him. He's just too cruel. So there's no sense in telling him what's going on. And you get a parallel scene with Beatrice afterwards, where Margaret and Ursula, two of the ladies involved in this, are saying the same thing about her. Benedick really loves her, but I don't think we should tell her this because she's just too cruel. It's just too hurtful for him, even though he's the only man of Italy. He's a great guy, but she's not going to see it. She never sees it in anybody. And they actually say she cannot love. And I think that is potentially really powerful and very heartbreaking. So again, they're not just being told, oh, he likes her and she likes him, and oh. And also, it's not just like, well, they think that I could not possibly be nice to this guy, so I'm going to take that dare and be nice. It's not just that. It's that they're overhearing something that I cannot love, that there's something missing in my ability to be a human being. And I would think that would be really disturbing, unnerving to try to cope with.
What fire is in mine ears? Can this be true? Stand I condemned for pride and scorn so much? Contempt, farewell, and maiden pride, adieu. No glory lives behind the back of such. And Benedick, love on, I will requite thee, taming my wild heart to thy loving hand. If thou dost love, my kindness shall incite thee to bind our loves up in a holy band. For others say thou dost deserve, and I believe it, better than reportingly.
Well, the break between Act Two and Three, between these two parallel scenes, suggests that Shakespeare is not in charge of the divisions of acts and scenes, because you certainly wouldn't want to take an intermission right there. And maybe he's avoiding repetition by having the scene with Benedick in prose and the scene with Beatrice in verse. At any rate, in the subsequent scene, Benedick decides, all right, now I'm a lover. And the others know what's going on, but he just is reserved and not his old wise ass self. And they, you know, goad him a little bit and have some jibes between themselves about him. But Benedick just says, I'm not as I have been, and leave me alone. I have a toothache. And they joke a bit more. Normally in productions, they would leave some of this bit out. But I saw one production, and I think it was in Ashland, Oregon, where the toothache bit meant that what he was doing was covering up the fact that he had shaved off his beard, which you could probably do in movies, but if you're on the stage, you have to be using a fake beard every night and then taking it off. So you usually don't mess with this matter. But the interesting thing was that he had this big bandage on, covering up the fact that he had shaved off his beard and tied on the top, just like when you have a toothache in Bugs Bunny cartoons. I thought, wow, all right, that's brilliant. There's no stage directions, but I think let's go with that. So Benedick is fed up with them joking so much, goes off with Leonardo, and we're left with Don Pedro and Claudio. And Don John comes in, the villain, and says, hey, you getting married tomorrow, dude? Yes. Bet you're not when I tell you what I got to say. What? If you've got anything to say or show me, tell me. And then Claudio says, if I see anything tonight, because Don John's inviting them, she's unfaithful. Why should I not marry her tomorrow in the congregation where I should wed? There will I shame her. And Don Pedro, who I thought we were supposed to like, says, and as I wooed for thee to obtain her, I will join with thee to disgrace her. Well, I don't know. 2 seasoned soldiers against 1 woman. Can we get other people involved in this? And again, why the silence? So you would think, you might talk to her. We might decide that we do need to cancel the caterers and the band, rather than decide, well, maybe this is bad and let's plan for the worst for tomorrow. So the public disgracing is what we're setting up here. It's called the shaming scene. It's got its own name for something that's really so harsh that some have wondered, can we even recover from this and end up back in the land of comedy? Now we get a new character, Dogberry. He's the head of the watch. He's a bungler too, and he overreaches in his language and is guilty of malapropisms again and again. This is your charge, he says to the watch. You shall comprehend all vagrom men. Well, apprehend. Anybody who's watched a courtroom drama or a legal show or a police show knows the vocabulary better than this dope. So when he leaves, Borachio and Conrad come in, and Borachio explains, here's what's happened. I pretended to be a wooer of Hero and was talking to her in the window and referring to all these affairs we had had for such a long time. And Claudio and Don Pedro were led by Don John, our boss, to see this. And he fell for it. He thought it was really Hero, but it was really Margaret in the window. Now, I don't know how you get away with this, and most productions that are wise avoid it, because what kind of sick sex game are we playing where, Margaret's pretending to be Hero and going tee-hee-hee and whatever. But that's what happened. The weird thing about this exchange is that before the explanation of all this, overheard by the watch, they're talking about fashion, haute couture from 2 thugs. What's this fashion obsession in this play? Well, the watch over here, they realize, aha, these are villains, and they capture them and arrest them and take them off. In another short scene, the women are together along with Harrow and Margaret and Ursula, and they're chatting about her gown tomorrow for the wedding. One of them refers to this gown being really excellent. You should choose it. I saw the Duchess of Milan's gown that has been praised so. What is this topical reference? First of all, we're told there is no Duchess of Milan at the time, but we're involved in clothes. And here is one of the other Howard Arundel slanders that Oxford said, the meanest shoemaker's wife in Milan, be it spoken with reverence and pardon, your majesty, is more gallant and more delicately suited every common working day than the queen, our mistress, Elizabeth, is at Whitsuntide. Now we're getting personal and problematic. You know, he might worship the devil and swear he's going to kill people and be drunk all the time, but insulting her clothes, now he's asking for it. In the same scene where the women are discussing fashion, Hero gives a reference to gloves that the Count sent me. They are an excellent perfume. And it seems as if the Earl of Oxford came back from Italy with perfume gloves, introducing a new fashion and presenting these to Elizabeth. Leonardo is approached by Dogberry saying, we've got some villains here. You might want to have something to do with them, figure out what's going on. We've comprehended two auspicious persons. No, you apprehended two suspicious persons. But Leonardo's preparing for a wedding. He doesn't have time for this. So we got to get on. Examine them yourself. Dogberry says, great, I got my opportunity. In Act 4, we get the shaming scene. And this is all set up for a wedding. The friar is there, ready to do the ceremony, and says to Claudio, you come hither, my lord, to marry this lady. Claudio says no. Leonardo interjects, to be married to her. You come to marry her. Oh, I get it. It was just fun wordplay at a sacred sacrament. Well, nice attempt at a save, but no. Claudio's annoyed out of his gourd and just attacks Hero viciously, ruins her reputation, and storms off with Don Pedro and Don John. The friar thinks, what's going on here? Leonardo is staying behind. He is just devastated too, and is so vicious himself, thinking that, I used to be sorry that I only had one daughter, and now I'm sorry I even have one. Oh, is nobody here a knife's point for me? I would rather die than put up with this horror. Well, the friar tries to calm people down and says, I've been looking at this lady, and I don't think that everything is, very clear here. What's interesting is that Benedick has stayed behind and has not joined his soldiers, but rather thinks, this is bizarre. And Don John, he says, Don John the bastard is involved in this. I don't know what to think. So the friar says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend that Hero is dead, and then they're going to feel bad, or at least it's going to give us some time to all calm down. And you think friars suggesting women pretend to be dead. Where have I heard that before? I don't see how anything could go wrong there. But that's going to be the plan. All right, we're settled. Benedick and Beatrice are left behind, and they have their scene together where finally they protest their love for each other. And Beatrice, of course, is really upset about her cousin Hero. And they talk about that and, just to anything I can do to help the situation. And Beatrice just kept saying, a man would have to do this, but it's a man's office. And I wish I could do it. Would that I were a man, but I can't. And she really just thinks somebody needs to get Claudio. Benedick interrupts everything and says, by the way, I do nothing love in the world so well as you. Isn't that weird? And Beatrice says, well, I was about to say the very same thing about you, but this isn't really the right time. So they admit their love for each other in packed in, enveloped in this moment, and then we get back to business immediately. So we're not just wallowing in a bathos of sentimentality, but rather, bid me do anything I can for you, says Benedick. This is the courtly love idea that when you finally get acknowledged as the knight for your lady, then you go out and slay dragons or get the molars of the Sultan of Baghdad or whatever it is she wants. Something from Baskin Robbins. But in this case, he says, okay, I have to do something for you. I have to put this into action. What do you want me to do to prove I love you? And she says, kill Claudio. And it's just this powerful, laconic line. Just everybody's stomach drops at that point. Kill Claudio. And he says, what? No, what? But they talk a little bit more, and she rails a lot more about his hideousness against her cousin. And he finally says, okay, I'm engaged. I will challenge him. Then we got to Dogberry and the investigation of the criminals, where Dogberry shows that there's a sexton there taking down the notes, doing the record. And Dogberry keeps scurrying back and forth. He asks the prisoners something, and he scurries back, and they say, no, we are not criminals. And he scurries back and says, write them down that they're not criminals. No, 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 no. It's not the way you go about this. So he doesn't really understand the procedures, but he's very literal-minded, and he wants everything written down. Well, eventually it comes out that their crimes, pretending that they were having an affair, or, Baraccio was having an affair with Harrow, and she was been slandered and all of that. The sexton says, this actually happened, and as a result, the lady's dead. Oh my God. Yeah. So the sexton has to scurry off and leaves behind the prisoners with Dogberry. Dogberry just keeps railing at them, and eventually they realize, what a bungler this Dogberry is. And one of them finally just breaks and says, you are an ass. You are an ass. And here's Dogberry's response.
Dost thou not suspect my place? Dost thou not suspect my years? Oh, that he were here to write me down an ass. But masters, remember that I am an ass. Though it be not written down, yet forget not that I am an ass. No, thou villain, thou art full of piety, and shall be proved upon thee by good witness. I am a wise fellow. And then what's more, an officer. And which is more, a householder. And which is more, as pretty a piece of flesh as any in Messina. and one that knows the law too, go to. And a rich fellow, enough, go to. And a fellow that hath had losses, and one that hath had, I had 2 gowns, and everything handsome about me. Bring him away. Oh, that I had been rent down an ass.
Now, sometimes some of my students have a hard time figuring what is happening here. It's not that he's so dumb that he doesn't know that it's bad to be called an ass. It's that he is obsessed with this writing down issue. So, because the sexton took off and didn't have the opportunity to add to their horrible crimes the fact that they called this guy an ass, he's got to insist that everybody remembers. What he's trying to say is, remember, they called me an ass, but he blurs it all together and just keeps, for the rest of the play, reminding everybody he's an ass. He's offended with that. Another nice touch there, though, is that even though he's a completely comic character, he's a bungler, he's given to malapropism, he's a nitwit, is that there's Shakespeare always humanizes these people, these bunglers. And in this case, it's that we didn't need to, he has had losses, a fellow that hath had losses. Something unpleasant has happened to him, like happens to human beings. So that's a nice touch. Anyway, last act, we go into this with Leonardo and his brother Antonio pretending to be annoyed, which they really are, of course, but pretending that Hero is dead. And they really get into the acting of the thing beyond you would suspect, their capabilities. And they confront Claudio and Don Pedro, who want nothing to do with them. Well, congratulations, you've killed a lady. Great soldiery, dudes. And Benedick comes on the scene, and they're thinking, oh, finally some relief here. Benedick's comic relief. These old guys, the tension, and they were threatening us and all that. But Benedick is dead set on carrying out the threat that Beatrice put into place. So he challenges Claudio, and they're going to fight it out. Apparently. At that point, Dogberry comes back in with the prisoners. He has found out what they have done and reports this to Don Pedro and Claudio and Leonardo and Antonio. And all has come to light that, in fact, Claudio and Don Pedro, too, have been wretches. So here is Dogberry's explanation of the crimes that they have committed.
Marry, sir, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondarily, they are slanders. Sixth, and lastly, they have belied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things. And to conclude, they are lying knaves. And masters, do not forget to specify which, when time and place shall serve, that I am an ass.
The misnumeration of all of this seems to be also a satire on the Howard Arundel libels, which are arranged in this sequence and repetitious and just completely bizarre. And also, if you pay attention, you realize every single crime is the same thing. Untruths, slanders, they said false things, they're lying knaves. It just says the same thing again and again, but it's in a list, as were the libels against Oxford. Well, for punishment, Claudio has to marry another daughter of Antonio, who must be so hideous that we couldn't even see her. And because she's the only heir now that Hero's dead, he's got to inherit everything. Bummer. But he also has to pay tribute to the tomb of Hero all the time with some poems and songs and such. All right. We get a scene where Benedick, now in love, adopts the assumption that when you are in love, magic things happen to you. You are ennobled, and suddenly you're an artist. You can come up with sonnets like magically out of your fingers. 14 lines, iambic pentameter with a couplet at the end, rhyming A, B, A, B, C, D. It's just amazing. And suddenly you can play oboe and guitar out the window at night and all that. But he's having trouble here. And, it's a worry if you can't write sonnets. Is it really love or I'm not sure. But he tries to write a song. He can find no rhyme to lady, but baby. And I can't tell you the list of composers, rock stars, and all the rest who can find no rhyme to lady but baby, which isn't even really a rhyme. Now, you can add crazy in there too. You can find that too. But bad news, crazy lady babies, none of those are really accurate rhymes. Can find no rhyme for scorn but horn. Now, why are you having scorn in your love poem? Because the lady is supposed to be scornful and standoffish. Oh, okay. Horn. Oh, no. Horns. Cuckoldry again. Yeah, that's bad news. I can find no rhyme for school but fool. Why would you have school in a rhyme? Good Lord. Love? School? Not in my. Oh, I get it. Like you're schooled in the matter of love, but then you end up being a fool. So what Shakespeare is acknowledging here is that rhyme words have additional resonance, that no matter what the rhetoric says, that I am no fool, or, there is no scorn, but nevertheless, those rhyme positions are going to resonate and have their effect, nevertheless. Well, I was not born under a rhyming planet. I can't do it. Beatrice comes in. And they talk for a while about, hey, when was the first time you fell in love with me? And, oh, what was it you liked about me first? And all that typical love stuff. And then Benedick says, thou and I are too wise to woo peaceably. Beatrice says, well, wise people never say that they're wise. Benedick says, yeah, that's an old cliche. If a man do not erect in this age his own tomb before he dies, he shall live no longer in monument than the bell rings and the widow weeps. This is the same concern in Hamlet and some other plays too. Like, you don't get remembered, you don't get respected. Well, how long is that? It's most expedient, says Benedick, for the wise, if Don Worm, his conscience, find no impediment to the contrary, to be the trumpet of his own virtues as I am to myself. Well, we're way off the topic here somehow. And what is this Don Worm capitalized and in parentheses is conscious? Oh, it must have been the Renaissance idea for that little worm niggling at you, bothering you. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't brag so much about myself. But if that were the case, because it doesn't appear anywhere else, and we have to translate his conscience, then what's happening? Oh, wait a minute. Don, John, Count John, we heard also. Count equals Earl. Because on the continent, you'd be introduced as the Count and Countess Dracula. But in England, we held on to that old Anglo-Saxon term, Earl. So you'd be introduced as the Earl and Countess Oxford. Worm? Oh, well, the Romance language root term there is Veer. So are we embedding Earl Veer here in a passage that's completely off the mark, completely extraneous, embedding it there when we're talking about being remembered or being buried? And then we get back to the love. And someone comes on and says, hey, there's some news here. Let's all go. Well, Claudio sings his song in honor of Hero. And in the end, he's got to marry this other fake girl. And they are all brought out, veiled, I guess. And he says, which is the lady I must seize upon? And I slap my head and think, oh, my God, this guy has learned nothing. Seize upon? Is really that the way you want to say it? But this woman is brought out. He gives in. I'll do it. I'll take her hand. And then she unmasks, unveils herself, and wow, she really does look like her. Oh, right, she is, because she was never dead. And they're all happy in there. It's all greatly wondrous. So I guess that's all resolved. Now, not for everybody. A lot of people think, the crimes have been too severe to forgive. But we want to end with some comedy, so let's have Benedick and Beatrice back. Benedick asks, okay, where's Beatrice? And she comes forth, and he says publicly, do you not love me? And she says, no, no more than a reason. You're wondering, wait a minute, you two just had two scenes together. What's going on? Then Benedick says, well, those guys said that you did. Beatrice asks, do you not love me? Well, no, no more than reason. Well, then these women, they said, so you don't. No, 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 no. We're not in love. Okay. Well, I guess. Then they're interrupted by notes. Claudio comes in and says, well, I don't know what he's saying now, but here's a paper that suggests that he actually does love her because it's a sonnet written in his own hand and it contains all of the affection that he has for her. And Hero comes in and says, oh, here's another piece of paper. It's another note from Beatrice. She loves him. Here's proof right here on the page. All right. So Benedick and Beatrice have to acknowledge, okay, well, if it's written down, it must be true. So I guess it must be that because they're in public and they are so long tied to their public images of railing at each other and being misogynists and being angry at the world, that they have to revert to this when they're in public, because otherwise it seems like too many steps backwards. But they're together. Hooray. And Benedick has a final interesting monologue.
I'll tell thee what, Prince. A college of wit-crackers cannot flout me out of my humor. Dost thou think I care for a satire or an epigram? No. If a man will be beaten with brains, a show nothing handsome about him. In brief, since I do purpose to marry, I will think nothing to any purpose that the world can say against it. And therefore, never flout at me for what I have said against it, for man is a giddy thing. And this is my conclusion.
There's something that always gets to me about that moment, and I have no idea why. For man is a giddy thing. And the only thing I can think of is that it's imbued with something that Oxford is finally saying about those accusations that he's countering all the way through. Because one of them was that he has such a giddy brain, and the word giddy must have gotten to him, and he decided, got to say something about that. Well, happy times. We're all going to get married. And first we call for a dance. Leonardo, he's been burned before. Can we get on with this time before something bad happens again? Says, no, let's get married. And Benedick says, no, you are my friend, Claudio. I was going to beat you, but we're together now and you're going to be my in-law. And let's have a dance. That's interrupted by a messenger saying, Don John has been taken in flight. We captured him and he's being brought back here as a prisoner. Benedick says, and this is his last line, think not on him till tomorrow. I'll devise thee brave punishments for him. Strike up, pipers, and we end up with notes, musical notes. But wait a minute. Back up a moment here. So let me get this straight. What's going to happen after this play is, first, we're going to dance. Then we're going to have some weddings. Then there's going to be a banquet, probably, maybe some entertainment. Then it's going to be the wedding night, and Benedick is going to spend it thinking up weird tortures. Do you see why I love this play? It's hilarious. All right. This event has been recorded. It'll be made available on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. And for most of my blab today and maybe some more, you can visit my website. It's michaeldelahoyde.org, all blurred together. Before we all zoom off to happy hour, I really want to thank our actors, Frank Lawler as Benedick, Rosemary Loughlin as Beatrice, and Hank Whittemore as Dogberry. Additionally, Balana Boger, aspiring law student, as our vocalist. Thanks for being here for this first episode of Shakespeare Illuminated. I had a blast.
will pitch a fit when I start asking who wrote those marvelous plays. They tell me to shut my trap, that they don't want to flap, nothing to unwrap about no authorship mystery. Truly, though, a merchant in grain who wrote knavery, as with Richard III, though Henry V is possibly worse. And in comedy, how about Dogberry and the Dromios and Juliet's nurse? Shakespeare is infinite, Shakespeare's illiterate. Something here doesn't fit the Stratford story. Someone illuminate me. As for tragedy, there's Mark Antony. Lear and Hamlet are absolute gold. Puck is magical, but most tragical is the rubbish we have been told. Something just won't cohere. Stratford